Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to our monthly community call that's offered by the Ubiquity Chartres Academy. It's always wonderful to check in every month as we move from one immersion that we just had this last July and prepare ourselves for the next one. So we'll have a full program today, as you know, with Rick Chartres, and I'll be saying a few things about that in due course. But I want to first welcome Dr. Georgie Szabo, who's the Dean of Graduate Studies at Ubiquity University, to provide our invocation. Normally Apila does it, but Apila is traveling from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan today. She's on a mission. As many of you know, she works with major foundations in the United States and Europe to work with indigenous peoples and tribes in all over the world, but including Middle Asia, that are dealing with either modernization or fundamentalism or government coercion in some form or another. So she is in the field, as it were. So I'll turn it over to Georgie. Thank you for stepping in on short notice, and we're pleased that you'll give us the invocation.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to read you a Buddhist blessing for the journey. Let us vow to bear witness to the wholeness of life, realizing the completeness of each and everything. Embracing our differences, I shall know myself as you and you as myself. May we serve each other for all our days, here, there, and everywhere. Let us vow to open ourselves to the abundance of life, freely giving and receiving. I shall care for you, for the trees and stars, as treasures of my very own. May we be grateful for all our days, here, there, and everywhere. Let us vow to forgive all hurt caused by ourselves and others, and to never condone hurtful ways. Being responsible for my actions, I shall free myself and you. Will you free me too? May we be kind for all our days, here, there, and everywhere. Let us vow to remember that all that appears will disappear in the midst of uncertainty. I shall sow love. Here, now, I call to you. Let us together live the great peace that we are. May we give no fear for our days, here, there, and everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you. What a gracious invocation. Here, there, and everywhere. It reminded me, I'm in Colombo. I just flew in from Amsterdam just a few hours ago, actually, and find myself moving from Northern Europe yesterday morning, where it was really cold, to the equator. There was over 30 degrees today. So I've been here and there and feel like I'm everywhere for this call, but I wouldn't miss the Chartres call for the world. Let me just start first by summarizing the communication that we sent out just a few days ago about the schedule for 2019. As you all know, Banafsheh Sayad, our creative director, had a major, and I would say, epiphany and deep numinous experience in Chartres, both during our course on Geometrica several months ago, and then staying about a month afterward, which included being in Chartres during the Feast of the Assumption, when they brought up the Black Madonna and paraded the Black Madonna with the Sancta Camisia, the Veil of Mary, through the streets of Chartres, and then placed the Black Madonna in the choir at the back of the cathedral before that the extraordinary, massive statue of the Ascension of Mary. I was there for part of it, and it was an extraordinary experience, in the aftermath of which Banafsheh felt very strongly that it was time to really globalize Chartres. And we have now taken what we're calling now the Chartres framework throughout the Ubiquity curriculum, and we're rolling it out as an organizing principle to several of our most innovative educational products that we are now rolling out in various countries all over Asia. That's why I'm in Colombo. I've been in Colombo with Matt Robertson, our Director of Admissions, and our VP for Asia and VP for Business Development for Asia for the last several months. And it's a powerful experience, starting in 2006, when we commemorated the 1000th anniversary of the founding of the Chartres Academy by Fulbert in 1006. And we committed to commemorate that by each year delving into one of the 7 liberal arts and re-quickening it and bringing that ancient form into modern expression. And we completed one cycle, and that was such a deep experience. We then started a new second cycle, and we're now right coming to the end, having finished Geometrica, and we're going into Astronomica, which is why Rick is here. But the major impulse at Ubiquity is what we're just referring to as the globalization of the Chartres impulse. And over the next several months, I'll be saying a lot more about it. But the way that it is working out in terms of the schedule, which is the only point I want to accentuate at the moment, is that we're going to be meeting as scheduled. We've been meeting there every first week of July, complete week in July for 13 years. That next year will be our 14th year. So we'll be meeting July 7 through 13 as per usual. We'll be dealing with the 7th of the liberal arts, Astronomica, and we're very pleased that Rick Chartres, author of Cosmos and Psyche and Passion of the Western Mind, will be our lead faculty. And then after that week, Andrew Harvey and Carolyn Mace and Georgie, who will be there during that week and teaching and interacting with Rick and so forth on this issue of the astrological framework of our time. We'll do a tour of mystical Paris. We did it last year around the feminine, and this year Andrew and Carolyn and Georgie will be delving into the mystics of Paris. In particular, Nicolas Flamel, one of the greatest of the alchemists of the medieval period, who was famous apparently for literally being able to transform lead into gold. And then, of course, the great Saint Louis Marie de Grignon, who was a devotee, as was Fulbert in the Chartrean school of Mary, and wrote his famous work is The Devotion of Mary, which we'll be contemplating while we're there. And then in August, we'll be meeting again those of you who are interested around the theme of Madonna rising. What are the implications of the Assumption of Mary and the declaration by the Pope ex cathedra that Mary is the mother of God. Jung, as you may know, considered that statement by the Pope to be one of the most important statements in 2,000 years of church history. It was the completion, he said, of Christian theology and the return of the masculine to its proper place, enfolded within the mother. So July 7 through 13 for Rick and Astronomica, and then July 14 through 19 with Andrew and Carolyn and Georgie for the Mystics of Paris, and then August 12th through 19th, so that we can be there for the Feast of the Assumption and the celebration of the Black Madonna with Banafshé, and Andrew will be there again, Ruth Cunningham, myself, and various others. And we're also, by the way, in contact with Linda Tucker, and she's going to be in Europe about the time of our first July 7 through 13 course, so we may have Linda drop in. As you may know, she's done the extraordinary work on the white lions, and her captivation by the white lions was due to her exploration on the deep astrological connection of the white lions as a species with the star system Sirius. And that was the substance of her first book on the white lion. So it's within that context that we're very, very pleased and honored today to have Rick with us. Many of you have taken his course with Stan Groff at the Wisdom School over the years on cosmos and psyche. He's internationally famous as an astrologer and a commentator, also philosopher, having written one of the standard college textbooks on the passion of the Western mind. And so thank you for joining us, Rick. And for the next 40 minutes or so, we just want to have a conversation with you. And I'll kick it off and ask a question or two, and Rick will make extended comments. And then we'll just open it up to all of you and have whatever comments or questions you want to make until the top of the hour. And then we'll bid everyone goodbye. But I think, Rick, clearly we are in extraordinarily turbulent times with the ascendancy of Trump, with the ascendancy now of right-wing strong men in country after country, the latest of which is in Brazil. I think all of us are looking for some kind of framework of value to understand what on earth is happening. Because things, if you look at it from the outside in, there would be cause to believe that the global situation is getting worse, not better. Although from the inside out, as these things often paradoxically work out, the light is inexorably burning ever brighter. But why don't we just start with you, introducing astrology and relationship to astronomy, and just making whatever comment you would like to make about the planetary transits that are guiding us during this very critical time in human history.
Thanks for welcoming me, Jim. And I just want to say hi to the whole community here of the Chartres Academy. Thank Georgie for the beautiful invocation, and which very pertinent to our whole orientation with, in a sense, addressing the wholeness of life, the connection between the heavens and the earth, between cosmos and psyche, and so forth. I also want to just now, since I also noticed that Anne Baring is with us, I just want to say hi to my good friend Anne. They're in England, while you, Jim, are in Colombo, and Anne's in England, and people are all over the world. I'm here in California. So the whole connection actually between astronomy and astrology, which is relevant to the seventh liberal art that we're addressing and exploring this coming summer, is in a way crucial for our understanding the situation we're in today in terms of the modern human being living in a world that is seen as being disenchanted, because basically astronomy and astrology were born together in a unity, and actually, if we look back at the history of astronomy and the periods of great advancement, those periods were coincided closely. This is something that historians of science have often noted, correlated closely with the periods when astrology was most central to that culture, whether we're talking about the archaic civilizations, or we're talking about the medieval period, of course, classical period, the medieval, and then and then the Renaissance. Astrology gave a psychological and a spiritual and a pragmatic motive to understand the movements of the planets, to be able to predict where their positions were going to be more accurately. And that actually led to the Copernican revolution, and then on to the whole powerful transformation of worldview that we're all living within today. So understanding that history that relates to the astronomy unity, and then separation, and now this reconnection that many brilliant minds are today recognizing, is I think will be an important theme in what we look at this summer. But most important will be what you brought up, Jim, which is to get an orienting frame of reference, a larger, in a sense, cosmic frame of reference for comprehending the powerful energies that have been unleashed in the world, and of many kinds. It's not a simple picture, and what the situation that has happened within the modern mind is that the way we were able to reconnect with astrology was through the deep engagement with our own psyche. And I think many of us have come to realize that one of the most useful ways of understanding the connection between planetary movements and the patterns of human experience, including of the whole zeitgeist of the collective psyche, is to understand these as basically archetypal powers, much along the line of the way Jung framed it, but recognizing that those archetypal powers, those gods and goddesses of the psyche, were not only human, but that they are embedded in the cosmos itself. And that what close and rigorous research shows of the correlations between the major outer planetary cycles and human history is that it seems as if periods when the outer planets come into major alignments with respect to the Earth, we see the activation of what we can think of as archetypal complexes. This is basically Carl Gustav Jung's great insight. He brought in he kind of recovered the idea of the archetypes from the Platonic tradition, as well as from the whole kind of ancient mythic imagination and capacity and intuition of mythic deities, goddesses and gods that were experienced in a very vivid way in human life. And Jung recovered that through his close attention to dreams and to works of art and to non-ordinary or extraordinary states of consciousness, visions, as well as in psychopathology, as well in people's symptoms. And he was able to show this powerful ground of the archetypal psyche that each of our individual psyches is embedded in. Now, if we look at the major alignment of our time, I mean, for the past 10 years, Uranus and Pluto have been in a square alignment. That's a powerful, what's called a dynamic aspect, or a hard aspect, or it's one of those 4 alignments in the course of the full cycle of from the conjunction to the opposition, and then halfway in between those 2 points are the squares. And those quadrature points in this huge cycle that takes over a century to go through. But during the approximately 12, 13 years, 14 years that those 2 planets move into one of those alignments, there tends to be an activation of 2 archetypal principles that are really consistently connected to those planets. And these 2 archetypes mutually activate each other. And one of them is Uranus, which has to do with the principle of change, of sudden change, the unexpected. There's a trickster element to it, surprise, openings, awakenings, but also disruptions of the status quo. It's connected also to creative advance, scientific, technological, but also reform, rebellion against what are seen as oppressive structures, and so forth. So that's all connected to the planet Uranus, and archetypally we can see how deeply connected that also is with the myth of Prometheus, the great kind of liberating rebel trickster figure in Greek myth. Each cultural mythology has some equivalent to that combination of the liberator, the rebel, the trickster energy. Then on the other side is Pluto, and Pluto is the elemental volcanic energies of what Freud would call the id. In the Indian religious mythos, it would be like Kali and certain aspects of Shiva, the Kundalini. It's the very powerful elemental energies of life and death that can be both destructive but also creative, and tend to be very transformative. And whatever Pluto touches, whatever other planet it's in alignment with, then that Plutonic, it's kind of Plutonic, Pluto, Hades, Dionysus, that kind of trinity of potent energies rooted in the depths of the body, of the psyche, of the earth, of the cosmos. That primal energy tends to intensify and empower whatever other archetype it's in relationship to overwhelming proportions. So when you bring these 2 together, what we can, I'll just give you a little, if we look at historically, like the last time that those 2 planets were in major alignment was the conjunction of the 1960s and early 70s. And the square before that was the 1930s. They were in an opposition during the French Revolutionary period, 1787 to 98. It's always about 12 to 14 years in there that it is a very potent period of typically intense political and social turmoil, strong movements towards change, rebellion, the overthrow of existing structures. There is strong emancipatory impulses, such as we saw in the 60s, or again now, the empowerment of women, of civil rights movement, abolitionism in other earlier eras, women's suffrage in earlier eras, things like the Occupy Now movements, the Arab Spring. Those are the French Revolution, the countercultural rebellions of the 60s. All those are typical examples of the Promethean Uranian principle being empowered by Pluto. But also it tends to be a period of rapid change when we feel like things are happening too fast, that history seems to have been accelerated to a very high degree. Also because of the technological connection to Uranus. These tend to be periods of intense technological change, advance, but also it can be deployed in problematic ways. It can become compelling. It can become in the service of darker energies. And so then we bring in the other way of looking at how these archetypes come together, and that's the Uranus Promethean principle, awakening whatever it touches in very both unpredictable but with unexpected consequences. But it tends to activate it, liberate it in sudden ways. And in this case, it's the plutonic energies of the depths, of the id, of the collective, transformational, but often can be just quite destructive as well. If we go back to the 1930s, the last time there was a square, Jung did a brilliant essay on what was going on in Germany in the 1930s. It was an essay called Wotan, about the powerful storm god that he saw taking hold of the Germanic people from the depths of the collective psyche there. And he said, we think the sun is shining and the weather's lovely, but this is 1936, he's writing this. And he said, but a storm is coming, and it will shake the walls and windows of our homes. And there's been an eruption of a kind of, we called it the blonde beast and the Wotan storm energy. And in many ways, we can see that kind of eruption. You could even say, for those of us in America that have had a particularly acute version of it in the form of our president, hardly want to say our president, but there he is. It's kind of like an eruption of Hades, the underworld, the plutocracy, you might say, of the underworld. And it's as if, like, in the way that Hades kind of abducted Persephone and brought Persephone down into the underworld. I think there's many people have that feeling here in the States, and I believe probably many in the world feel it, each in their different ways, that there's been a kind of, here in the States, we'd say, like, the soul of America was in some sense abducted into the underworld in this last year. And we're having to confront, in a way, the shadow of the the American people, of the American psyche, the American way of life, at a level that we have never really had to confront so potently, certainly not in this century or the last century. So it's this combination of, it's both a period of tremendous potential for I mean, remember that Obama was president for the first 8 years, which was just in itself a great movement of towards racial equality, the empowerment of an African American to the presidency, and at the same time, then the next president that came in, Trump, not unlike having Richard Nixon in the late 60s, it much more is representing this kind of unleashed will to power. So those are a few, that's a little background. I went on a little longer, but I wanted to both give a historical context to where we are, and also a kind of philosophical context, just in terms of understanding how could the movements of the planets correlate with these powerful archetypal complexes getting activated in the collective psyche. And I think one of our best ways of coming to terms with how that can happen is Jung's idea of synchronicity, that, or as Plotinus put it, everything's interconnected in the cosmos, inner and outer, heaven and earth. And as Plotinus put it, everything breathes together. If we think of it in that very holistic way, and kind of get out of the way of thinking of it as like a kind of linear mechanistic causation, that the planets are making us feel a certain way. It's more like the archetypes are associated with the planets in some synchronistic way. And this will be my last point here before I give it back to you, Jim. And that is the beauty of the astrological gift that we've been given by the cosmos, is that by having an understanding of what archetypal powers are activated at what time, it gives us a capacity to more consciously enact those energies in life-enhancing ways, rather than unconsciously acting them out in destructive forms. Because every archetype is multivalent. Every archetype has great nobility, life-enhancing potential, as well as a shadow. And by having a more conscious relationship with the archetypal depths of our own human psyche collectively, as well as individually, we can be better participants in the cosmic unfolding, and less likely to just be puppet-like in a kind of acting out of these energies in a blind way. In a sense, bringing in the Buddhist perspective, we can be more skillful in our relationship to these great powers. So I hope that gives a little bit of a window. There's of course much more going on in our time, but that's been the dominant alignment of the last decade, and really the whole collective psyche now is saturated with that archetypal potency and kind of reeling from it in many ways.
Well, thank you so much for that. That's so deep. And let me just underscore one thing, just so everybody takes it in. The article that Jung wrote in 1936 was called Wotan. That's W-O-T-A-N. And if there's a single article one should read to really get to the gravity of what Rick is saying, is that essay by Jung. It's in his collected works. I think you can just Google it. Just Google Jung Wotan. It's compelling. It was written out of some lectures, actually, that he gave at Yale, where as a German-speaking Swiss, like we today, feeling a deep undercurrent of malevolence that seemed to concentrate itself in this man Hitler, and in our day in this man Trump. But if you note, and this is what I wanted you to just explore a little more deeply, Rick, if you note, we have the same kinds of uncertainties about Trump as the Germans and the Europeans had about Hitler. So what is so clear looking back in time, while it was unfolding, given the chaotic function of the multivalence of the archetypes, Trump was, like Hitler, immensely popular with a core group of about 35–40% of the Germans who went with him with alacrity off the cliff. And it took the West, it took the Allies till 1939, 1940, 1941, till they really woke up to that Hitler was really Hitler. And I think we're having that same kind of cognitive dissonance, Rick, right now, that we feel the intuition, the synchronicity of the archetypal similarities and synchronicities between Uranus, Pluto squared now and Uranus, Pluto squared back in the 30s, but we're collectively unable to name it. And what would be your comment on this, and how would you suggest what can we do about it to clarify our thinking so that we can act more capably? Because it was because the world did not act that we ended up with the Holocaust, nuclear weapons, and an orgy of 50 million people dead. And with Trump now and climate change, we're at a whole different level of malevolence that is now planetary. So somehow in this mix, Rick, we've got to see more clearly than they did. And we have to act more decisively than they did to prevent the catastrophe that seems increasingly obvious is happening, but it seems also unstoppable. What would be your comment on that? And maybe you could comment on Trump's actual chart. Is there anything particular to his astrological chart that would explain some of the power that he has, almost the Hitlerian hypnotic power over these people in his rallies? I mean, it's extraordinary.
He has an extraordinary chart, and if it had been, let me just say, when you look at a chart, the moral vector of a person is not visible in a chart. As some of you have heard or read my writing about this, Hitler's chart and Charlie Chaplin's chart were very similar. They shared most of the same aspects, born within a few days of each other, and yet they had certain similarities, including putting on vast illusions that affected millions around the world. They were both dictators on their set. They both were brilliant communicators in unusual ways, etc. But what a radical difference in the moral quality that person brought into the kind of enactment of those archetypal energies. Trump, with another person who might have, another soul, as it were, that would have had Trump's chart, could have. It's an extraordinary chart. I think we don't have time to do anything like justice to it, but he's also going through very, very powerful and critical transit. I mean, really the whole period he's been president, and it just keeps getting more and more zeroed in on, I mean, I think he feels the vice grip coming in on him in many ways. Let me just say, in terms of your larger question of connecting it to the 30s and how can we see this differently, I mean, certainly the Europeans, our allies, were certainly fully aware by 1939 just how destructive Hitler was from the moment obviously that he he invaded Poland on September 1st, 39, and bombing England through so much of 1940. But, and the rest of Europe overrunning it very quickly in that period. But we are in a different position than people in the 1930s. Number one, the 1930s happened. Also, the 1960s happened. We do not, history doesn't just repeat itself. It's a kind of spiral that takes into it rhymes, so to speak. It reconnects with the archetypal energies and phenomena that were characteristic of the earlier period, but it builds on that. There's an evolutionary, a cumulative quality to it, and we learn from the past. There was a very similar energy between the beginning of World War I and the beginning and the early 1980s, when the sense of a nuclear holocaust that could bring the world into it was the height of the Cold War. This is before Gorbachev had come into power. Reagan was calling Russia, or Soviet Union, the evil empire, et cetera, et cetera. And so many people were aware of the shadow potential of the energies that were activated then. This was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which again, we're moving into, there was a moral stand that was taken by millions around the world that in a sense helped pull that potential for apocalypse back from the cliff. And I think that's very important to recognize that think about the extent to which the German people really took in the shadow of what they did. I mean, not every person, et cetera, but as a culture, they did more than, they obviously had the archetypal expression of evil in human history. And the German people, the German soul has, at its highest level, really has confronted that, and in many ways, the Northern Europeans, Germans, Dutch, Scandinavian countries have been kind of models of a more more tolerant, more socially, politically, ecologically responsible way of life, and I think. We need to recognize how, there are many, many people. A week from now, 5 days from now, less than that, we will all know 3 days from now, a lot more than we do right now in terms of how awake, for example, the American people are in terms of voting. That will make an enormous difference in the next 2 years. For the world, because not only international relations, but also the state of the earth is so much affected by the power that the American government can exert in terms of wise or destructive policies. So I believe that it's important I could bring up, there's astrological differences between the 1930s and now. There's that deep, continuity that I mentioned before, but there's been an evolution since then, and there are other factors at work that in the next summer we can go into more detail about. I do not believe that, obviously we all have to act, but I also believe that there are many more people today who are awake to the shadow of human depredation of the earth, people who are awake to the shadow of misogyny and the abuse of women, and the need for full empowerment of women and honoring of the feminine. There are many more people who are aware of the dignity and crucial value of the multiplicity of cultures and wisdom traditions in the world, rather than there just being one, or like the modern mind or something that should consider itself as being superior to everything else. There are so many people who have gone through that transformation in these various ways, ecologically, social justice, multiculturalism, and so forth, that I think we are truly in a different position than we were in the 30s, and it's partly because the 30s and the 40s happened, and everything since. There's a moral evolution that goes on in the collective psyche. That's what the idea of Theodore Parker's insight, which Martin Luther King and others, Obama, have quoted, and that is the idea that there is an arc of the moral universe, and it is long, but it seems to bend towards justice, even through and as a consequence of periods when there is an eruption of the shadow, such as we are facing today.
Thank you so much, Rick. I can hardly wait to have you for a whole week next year to go into these issues. We'll open it up now. If anyone wants to ask a question or comment, just raise your hand, and Dan will open up your line. And in the meantime, Anne, did you want to make a comment? Georgie, would you like to make any kind of a comment or question of Rick?
Thank you. I just wanted to give the talking stick to Anne Baring. Respect my lovely friend. Yeah, I can't wait to see you again, Rick. Thank you so much for this presentation, and I will have gazillions of questions from you next summer. Maybe just a quick question: that how is it? Can we actually 100%ly read the messages from the stars? Can you actually see any overthrowing tendency in terms of the US political system that may or may not happen in the next few days? You know, how much free will plays into this equation?
Say how much free will?
Yeah.
Yeah, it plays a crucial role, and this is my point about the multivalence of these archetypal energies. Multivalence means that there's like a rainbow spectrum of ways in which they can express themselves, ranging from, in moral terms, from the most life enhancing and positively creative, compassionate, etc., to highly destructive shadow forms of the same archetype. Every single archetype has that. Even Aphrodite, or obviously think of something like Mercury and the mind and language, speaking, ideas, how it can go in multiple ways. And free will, that's what makes room for human freedom. And I think in some respects, one reason why the astrological cosmos was negated by the modern mind was partly to help forge a greater sense of human freedom, so that because astrology was often more deterministic in the way it was interpreted in earlier centuries. And I think we may be now in a better position to reconnect with the anima mundi in a way in which we can be more conscious participants in a partnership, a relationship. The important thing is not just to recover the anima mundi, the soul of the world. It's to forge a new relationship to it, to come into a new way of relating that also expresses the potential for our free will. So that would be my response to that important question. And
thank you, Rick. Thank you, Georgie. Anne, is there any comment you want to make at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to just make a comment about, first of all, I'd like to thank Rick from the bottom of my heart for what he's just said. It's so helpful. But I remember that Marie-Louise von Franz said in her book on Jung, His Myth in Our Time, she said that when the feminine archetype is unconscious, it manifests as the will to power. And I think that's precisely what's happening in relation to what Rick has been saying, because we see everywhere the will to power coming up in its most ruthless and terrifying form, which doesn't seem to be stoppable. So the only antidote to that is really to animate the anima mundi, as much as all of us can in our own particular ways, to really invoke it, really, as the Holy Spirit, I think, because that is what it is to me. It's Holy Spirit as well as the anima mundi, and the soul of the cosmos, and ask it to help in guiding us through this very, very difficult passage that we're in. So that's all I'd like to say, but thank you all so much. It's been so interesting.
Thank you, Anne. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that there is that whole, in a sense, it's the destructive side of the Kali archetype is very connected to that, to Pluto. There's as an astrological principle, Pluto, what the Greeks would call Pluto, Hades, Dionysus, that kind of trinity of energies of the deep powers of life and death. In its more destructive form, of course, Kali herself in Indian understanding has multiple aspects, multiple ways of expressing, but one is certainly that kind of unleashed will to power. And thank you for sharing that. Great to hear your voice. We're old friends, Anne and I, and we haven't seen each other for a couple of years, so I'm glad to hear from you, Anne.
Thank you.
Well, you know, and one of the aspects, I mean, for both of you to comment on is, you know, this naked will to power has such deep misogynistic, anti-feminine, racial subordinationist, quite, you know, supremacist aspects to it. It's, you know, as we go in, even this weekend, I was just seeing on the news that the Republican Party is just dumping millions and millions of dollars onto the airwaves across America around, you know, minorities in crime and the caravan. And speaking about the caravan as disease carriers and terrorists in many of the same ways that the Nazis spoke about the Jews. And the identification of Soros, you know, that this is funding the caravan. Yeah. So you have some very deep, you know, when you talk about Plato, Rick and Anne, you know, this stuff is deep and it's malignant and it's evil and it's
Pluto, not Plato, right?
I mean Pluto.
Yeah.
When you bring that energy up and combine it, you know, with Hades and then Uranus, it becomes like an overwhelming, almost cascade of negative energy, and it's difficult to know how to withstand it.
Well, that kind of destructive conglomeration of xenophobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism, you know, fascist mass energies of that will to power, and all those different ways, white supremacy that we've seen unleashed in these recent years. And the tendency, as you described it, to describe the other in form like that, like in terms of its disease or vermin or
Exactly.
Animals, beasts, rats, all that type of imagery. Those are classic. First of all, those are all Plutonic images, which is very, you know, very animal-like, scatological, and so forth. The underworld. And what we can vividly see is the extent to which those are all projections onto the other of the shadow of the person who is, or the parties that are making the accusations. It's their shadow that they're reading, the destructive, the undermining quality. That's what's being projected onto the other because it can't be faced inside by those individuals, because their identity is based on holding power, and they'll do anything to not lose power. It's an almost life and death struggle for them. So we're in a profound period of a kind of psychological, moral, and spiritual battle for the soul of the earth. I mean, I don't think it's it's not an exaggeration to say that's what's at stake. And I know we're at the end of our time here, but we'll be addressing that, I think, in much greater depth this summer together.
Well, and, you know, as we come to a close, I think I'd love to hear from you about, you know, how would you describe the transformational power of the deeper feminine that can work through all this in a redemptive and salvific way?
I think I see it as that we're all contained in the quantum physics sense. We're all contained in this deep, light-filled vacuum, if you like. Well, it's not really a vacuum, it's a plenum. But all of us are communicating all over the world with each other with this distress and this fear and this anxiety that something terrible is about to happen in the way of perhaps nuclear explosion or war or whatever. But I think we have to remember that we are contained in this greater whole, this cosmic ground, this divine ground. I think we must use the word divine and not use only the scientific word field. And I think, as I said, we have to invoke now really the Holy Spirit because this is a crucial time, and we have to absolutely get through this narrow passage like Odysseus goes between Scylla and Charybdis. We have to realize that this time of transit is crucial for the future. We have to get through it in the best possible way. And all of us, I think, can pray really for help and for support and for illumination in the sense that Rick has given it to us, illumination of what's happening, and therefore an orientation of the path that each of us has to choose and go through or go on, if you like. That's the way I see it. And I feel myself in my little house in England so powerless, but on the other hand, if I tune into this greater being that I'm part of, if you like, this divinity that I'm part of, that power is infinite. And so we all have this infinite power if we just recognize that we have it within us. And I think what's coming into consciousness now is the fact that we are all part of the divinity we've been worshipping for thousands of years. This is my major teaching at the moment. So we all have that core of divinity, which helps us to tune into this deep field. That's really what I feel and my contribution tonight. And I would just like to thank you all for the opportunity of speaking something that's so close to my heart and that I feel passionately about. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was beautiful and so important to bring in that recognition that we're embedded in a divine whole that has powers of transformation, of redemption, of illumination, and so forth, that and grace that human beings clearly need at this time. And maybe I just would add, this is where we, whether through prayer, through invoking those divine spiritual powers, and through a kind of act of hope, a hope that is not based on a rational assessment of the data. That's different. That's optimism or expectation. This is hope more as a theological virtue